Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love to the author and me. On to the show. Rodhart's story was gradually forgotten with the passing of a few centuries. This legendary powerhouse was like a shooting star that glazed across the sky of Amrel. He did not leave behind many achievements for the future generations to remember him by. It wasn't until one fateful day when Rodhart walked out of his grave that he reminded people of his existence. What followed was what you heard. Regardless of whether Rodhart was willing to or not, it was a fact that he was the first Retribution Knight of the mainland of Amrel. Sensing the birth of this Retribution Knight, Death Knights from all over the world gravitated towards him. They appointed Rodhart as their leader, and the team of Death Knights started a massacre in the breezy plains under his leadership. There was no one who had the ability to stop them. All elite armies were merely toys to them. Under their attacks, any formidable fortress would be immediately destroyed like a clay sculpture, Canoris narrated excitedly. As an ancient deity, the existence of humans had zero significance to him. Hence, it was as though he wasn't recounting a horrible bloodbath, but a thrilling event he would love to partake in. Almighty Soul Trader, should I remind you that the hopes of your new body lay in the hands of a human being? Lin Li asked, slyly. Although he would not claim that he was a kind-hearted man, he could not help but remind Canoris about it. Canoris suddenly recalled that the monster like Lin Li was indeed a human as well. Oh, yes, you are a human as well? My memory is failing me, he laughed awkwardly. Cut the crap. Tell me about other things that you know, such as Rodhart's ability. Lin Li understood that it was only normal for Canoris to have no sympathy for humans. It was the same as how humans would not drop a tear for the death of ants. The breezy plains then was pathetic. Although Rodhart turned into an undead creature, he acted as the head referee of the Brilliant Shrine, after all. This ex-head referee waved the butcher's knife at the pitiful human beings without hesitation. It was really, Canoris wanted to squeeze a tear or two out of his eyes, but he suddenly came to the realization that he was lacking a body. How could he shed any tears? Rodhart had started to look for the pathway into the sanctuary realm when he was a paladin in the legendary realm. How different were his powers when he turned into a Retribution Knight? Did he really enter the sanctuary realm? Lin Li asked, curiously. Although I'm not sure of his abilities, I've heard that he had fought 3 legendary powerhouses without his team of Death Knights. He defeated the combined forces from the 3 level 23 powerhouses using a single attack. This is enough to show that the ability of Rodhart then was at least level 24. But, I feel that it is more likely for him to have been level 25. What? Level 25? Lin Li was stunned. He gave the unmoving man on the throne an anxious, but fleeting glance. The sight of that still figure reassured him slightly. Level 25 meant that the Retribution Knight had already reached the sanctuary realm. It was no wonder that he had the ability to bring about such a huge calamity in the breezy plains. If he were a normal Retribution Knight in the legendary realm, he would have been eliminated by legendary powerhouses. It was rare to find enough opponents in the sanctuary realm. This was also one of the characteristics of a Death Knight. As long as he reached the legendary realm to become a Retribution Knight, the Death Knights from all over the world would gather by his side as fast as they could regardless of the distance they had to travel. Then, these Death Knights would stop their personal growth in power, and transfer the spiritual force they'd acquired from the massacres to their leader. Hence, the spiritual force from killing 1/3 of the population of the breezy plains would have been given solely to Rodhart. It would only be natural for his abilities to be improving at a rapid pace. As he was the first Retribution Knight of the breezy plains, it was too late for the legendary powerhouses to stop him when they missed the best timing. Although he really entered the sanctuary realm, this method is really, Lin Li commented vexedly. Although he was not one of the fanatical devotees of the Brilliant Shrine, he knew he would not have borne to do the same like Rodhart. That was a man who had slaughtered 1/3 of Breezy Plains' population. Lin Li found it really hard to believe that he'd been a paladin from the Brilliant Shrine in the past. Him using this method is not surprising. Since he was a Retribution Knight, and an undead creature, he already had no relationship with humankind. If he succeeded in bringing his team of Death Knights into the endless abyss, the throne in any of the abyss levels would definitely belong to him, Kenora said optimistically. You have said a lot, but, can you be sure that this man before us is Rodhart? Lin Li asked. If this Retribution Knight is really Rodhart, then the sword in his hand has to be the Eternal Frost Blade. In other words, if that sword is the Eternal Frost Blade, we would be able to make his identity clear, explained Kenoris. After all, he had only seen Rodhart from afar. He could not tell if the man before him was Rodhart or another Retribution Knight. Eternal Frost Blade? Lin Li repeated after Kenoris. Only then did he notice the sword in the hands of the Retribution Knight. He had thought it to be a normal sharp blade. After looking at it closely, he realized that it was because the aura of the Retribution Knight had overwhelmed that of the sword. That's right. When Rodhart was still a paladin, the weapon he used was not the Eternal Frost Blade, and the Brilliant Shrine would never put such a powerful weapon in his grave. No one knew where he had gotten the Eternal Frost Blade after he became a Retribution Knight. There was a probable theory that Rodhart had planned for his return from the Immortal King's mausoleum. If not, he would not have requested to be buried in the breezy plains. It being a place he had been adopted in would be a valid excuse. This Eternal Frost Blade was what he took out from the mausoleum of the Immortal King, which he then hid in the breezy plains as he waited for the arrival of the Death Knights. How should we verify if that is the Eternal Frost Blade? Although I can sense its magical wave, there are many other weapons that emit the same wavelength, Lin Li asked again. The two main materials needed to create the Eternal Frost Blade were the Eternal Ice Crystal Metal and the Space Sand. During forging, it required the use of the cold black flames from the Endless Abyss. However, Eternal Frost Blades that are created using this method do not have a significant ice attribute. The real effect of the Eternal Frost Blade is to create a temporal gap in the space that could distract the enemies. Then, the sword would pierce the enemies' bodies directly. This was absolutely a weapon made to kill mages. The defensive equipment mages had, such as the elemental shield and ice wall, were never directly worn on their bodies. Established a distance away from the mages, they helped to create safe buffer zones between the enemy's weapon and the mages' bodies. This was due to the fact that the defense equipment would create a depression upon contact with intrusive attacks, regardless of whether it was a magical or a physical attack. If they were to be set up closely against the skin, without any cushioning of the impact, then while the user would not be immediately split in half with a strike of the enemy's sword, he was bound to suffer some wounds. That being said, the Eternal Frost Blade was a weapon that could create the gap in space to let the sword penetrate the magical defense system built up by mages. Then, it would land on the mages' bodies like a sneak attack. I think that we should leave this place as soon as possible, Lin Li muttered. How could the smithing guru not recognize weapons created from the eternal ice crystal metal? It was very obvious that the sword in the hand of the figure on the throne was constructed from the same material. This meant that the sword was the Eternal Frost Blade, and the Retribution Knight was Rodhart himself. Lin Li did not want to be made an example of how men got themselves killed due to greediness for the future generations. Even though he had reached the legendary realm, and he had a lot of trump cards with him, he knew his enemy was a level 25 Retribution Knight who had a mage-killing sword. To be honest, Lin Li really had no confidence in battling such a figure. Hold on, are you sure that that is the Eternal Frost Blade, and he is Rodhart? Kenoris questioned. He was not willing to retreat. Of course, I would not make a mistake in recognizing that material. Unless there is another Retribution Knight who acquired the Eternal Frost Blade, this sleeping fella has to be Rodhart. Therefore, we'd better get ourselves out of here quickly before he wakes up. Lin Li conversed with Kenoris via mental strength while cautiously observing Rodhart, who was sitting still. Huh. If he was Rodhart, why should we escape? Have you forgotten that he had been purified by Prophet Willan? He would have lost his previous power. Kenoris snickered. Is that so? To be honest, I'm very skeptical of the concept of purification. Didn't you say that this Rodhart is level 25? That's the sanctuary realm. How would there be anyone who could purify him? I doubt even the Pope of Brilliance Shrine could do that, Lin Li rebutted in suspicion. There were many a time that legends were found to be false. Lin Li could accept the story that Rodhart had been purified by the prophet Willan if the Retribution Knight was in the legendary realm. But, it was different now that the knight was in the sanctuary realm. Prophet Willan really needed to have great powers to purify a Retribution Knight in the sanctuary realm. How could Kanoris not know what was on Lin Li's mind? Do not belittle Willan. He was not only the prophet of Brilliance Shrine, but also the son of the Holy Light. He held the purest holy force in this world, having the ability to purify any foulness or evilness. Even the Pope would not have the ability to compare to him. After Juresco left the Supreme Council, the organization had been run by Apophis and his team. After having a battle with Prophet Willan, Apophis admitted his inferiority publicly, and confessed his admiration for Willan's ability. Because of this battle, and the existence of Prophet Willan, Brilliance Shrine became the most powerful force. Even the Supreme Council had to settle for the second in rank. At that time only Juresco had the ability to deal with Willan. Unfortunately, Willan disappeared mysteriously after battling Rodhart. Without the leadership of Willan, the glorious Brilliance Shrine suffered attacks from the surrounding forces, and suffered a dip in powers. They nearly got taken over by the waning Darkness Shrine. That shouldn't be it, Lin Li muttered doubtfully. The Brilliance Shrine had only been established after Dark Age, and it had been a few centuries since the end of it when Willan purified Rodhart. That was when the High Elves had long been overthrown, and a few centuries since the death of Osric. During that period of time, you should be in the Eternal Furnace. Why would you even know about these matters? Lin Li was not doubting the credibility of Kanoris's words, but his identity. From being a pathetic soul trapped in a furnace, to being an almighty soul traitor, then an ancient deity. Lin Li really couldn't trust Kanoris fully. Have you forgotten that I have taught you how to engulf the shadow of the Dragon of Destruction? Kanoris asked. I have created multiple shadows in the mainland of Amril, before being caught by Osric. At that time, I tried to use my last shadow to help me look for somebody to release me from the Eternal Furnace. In the end, neither did I find my savior, nor did that shadow survive. God damn it, I don't even know my enemy. Lin Li knew that creating a shadow and collecting the demonic runes from it did not need much effort. As long as one had the ancient demonic runes, he would be able to create a shadow with part of his energy. Same for Lin Li, he had the ability to do that as well. However, as a legendary mage, how could he compare himself to the Dragon of Destruction? He knew he would be falling out of his realm if he were to create his own shadows. Not to mention a legendary mage, a sanctuary master would not have chosen to weaken himself with such a boring idea. The issue of shadows was totally irrelevant at this juncture. However, Lin Li had an idea after hearing Kanoris's introduction of Prophet Willan. Didn't Sendros say he was a shadow of darkness? Lin Li knew that was because he owned the debris of the stars, gloomy dark. Then, could holy light turn him into the shadow of holy light? Lin Li loved everything that could allow him to take an advantage. A simple mistaking him as the shadow or somebody's son could give him a huge bunch of coolies to run errands for him without a price. He was always worried when Sendros addressed him as the shadow of darkness, as he feared that it might turn him into the target of the Brilliance Shrine. Now, he was really proud of the fact that he was the shadow of both darkness and brightness. This meant that he could gain advantages from both sides. Lin Li glanced at the man before him. Could his present state be a result of Prophet Willan's purification? If Rodhart had lost the power he had with the purification, Lin Li would be able to use his holy light on Rodhart. No matter what, he still could not determine if Rodhart was dead or all alive. Since he had the holy light, Lin Li knew that his journey to this palace shouldn't be a wasted trip. Lin Li stood there and cautioned himself against Rodhart while letting his warlock's eyes survey the entire palace. The scenes the warlock's eyes traveled to see were reflected in Lin Li's eyes. Lin Li couldn't help but feel happy that he didn't escape in fear of Rodhart. The entire palace was a treasury. It seemed that he had made a wise decision in dismissing Hutton. As compared to this place, Vanscore's treasury was nothing. Apart from jewelry and all sorts of magical materials, there were also high-quality and delicate weapons and magical equipment. Lin Li could not help but secretly jump in joy. The latter would save him a lot of effort. What made Lin Li feel really excited was the different magical books, as well as huge piles of spells written in the High Elf script that he saw through the warlock's eyes. Despite being a knowledgeable legendary mage, more than half of those spells were something he had not encountered before. If he did not guess wrongly, there would be a huge portion of them that had been lost to the mainland of Anril with the passing of time. This made them incomparable to the jewelry and equipment. He would be able to make all the mages in Anril crazy if he were to use any of the lost spells. Lin Li subconsciously opened his mouth and started drooling excessively. The warlock's eyes was also known as the third eye mage's owned. It was purely constructed from mana, and could travel anywhere within the reach of Lin Li's magical elements. However, there was something blocking the warlock's eyes now. Could it be that there was a place even his magical elements could not enter? Lin Li composed himself and decided to venture to that place personally. He was very curious about the thing that could obstruct his magical elements. After confirming that there were no signs of Rodhart awakening, he brought the two undead followers towards a secret chamber in the basement. There was no reason to stay here. If Rodhart woke up, Uchvalusi and Norfeller would not have the ability to deal with him at all. Hence, Lin Li could only bring them along with him, and if Rodhart were to wake up, he would accept his misfortune. Lin Li walked past the tall platform that was built with bones, and led the other two through the side entrance behind it. After passing through a considerably short corridor, they found themselves in a room. If the structure of the palace was like a common palace's, the room should be for guests to rest in, which meant it was just a normal room. There was a tall bookshelf by the wall. Apart from magic books, there were also many biographies written in the High Elf's language. Lin Li found the hidden levers very quickly with the help of the warlock's eyes. He walked towards one of the thicker books and gave it a hard push. What followed a noisy sound of some mechanism was the opening of a secret door below the table in the room, revealing a passageway leading down. They saw a wall at the end of the passageway when they walked along the path. There were no more doors or hidden levers. It was as though they had encountered a dead end. If not for Lin Li's warlock's eye's lack of ability to pass through it, Lin Li would have thought that there wasn't anything behind that wall. "Master, should we blast this wall to pieces?" Uchvalusi asked. "Yes," said Lin Li as he nodded. Yet, after giving the wall a closer look, he waved a hand to stop Uchvalusi, who was about to cast his spell. "Wait, there's no point. It is a magic-resistant gem." There were many dim-colored gems etched on that wall. People who were unaware of it might have thought that those were some common stones due to their grayish hue. However, Lin Li was very sure that these dark gray stones were authentic gems. The function of the magic-resistant gem could be inferred from its name. It had a strong resistance to magical elements, and each one of them was as good as an elemental shield. With the help of inscription, the gems were arranged according to the magic-resistant magewealths. For each additional magic-resistant gem used, the resistance to magic would be raised several-fold. When hundreds of such gems were inlaid into the same wall, the power would be as strong as 1,000 elemental shields. Not to mention a lich like Uchvalusi who was as powerful as an archmage, even a legendary mage like Lin Li himself or a powerhouse from the sanctuary realm would have to sigh when they were faced with such a wall. Lin Li could not help but lament Osric's wealth. It was no wonder that he was overthrown as the ruler of the Felon Kingdom. How many acts of extortion did it take for Osric to accumulate such wealth? Each of the magic-resistant gems was worth up to 1,000,000 gold coins, and they were rare on the market. Anyone who was not working in the magic industry would definitely want to hide the magic-resistant gem if they were to find one. It would act like an elemental shield for them against mages. It would be a total nightmare to a mage if a warrior were to possess any equipment that had a magic-resistant gem. The magic that the mage prided himself on would not be able to harm even a hair on the warrior, giving the warrior full confidence to launch all of his attacks against the arrogant mage. It would be totally impossible for anyone to use physical strength to break the wall that was inlaid with 1,000 magic-resistant gems. What would possibly be hiding in the secret chamber behind the wall that would warrant such powerful protection? The wealth these magic-resistant gems were worthy of was enough to turn any man crazy. What could possibly be more valuable than these magic-resistant gems? Lin Li was full of anticipation for the items behind the wall. But it wouldn't be easy to get past it. It was an extremely ordinary wall, just like the others. After having 1,000 magic-resistant gems set up on it, however, the wall became something even sanctuary powerhouses couldn't use their physical strength to break apart. Yet, Lin Li was not somebody who only knew how to use physical strength. He believed that there should be many other ways to solve this problem. It would be the matter of whether he could find one or not. There was a well-known figure who once said, "Knowledge is power," and power was one thing that Lin Li never lacked. Uchfalusi and Norfeller stood at the side quietly. They knew that they were of no help in such situations. What they could do was to stand by vigilantly and not disturb their master's thoughts. While they watched out for safety, Lin Li was standing before the wall, and was observing the patterns those gems were arranged in as well as the magewefts that connected them together. It would not require hundreds of magic-resistant gems if the inscriptor only wanted to lay them into the wall, for one would be more than sufficient. Osric wouldn't be foolish enough to use this wall as a display for the gems given that the hundreds of them would only be as effective as just one gem. Could it possibly be a mageweft array? Yet, Lin Li was not able to relate any of the mageweft on the wall to any array in his knowledge. Lin Li stroked his chin with his hand and lifted his head slightly, and ran his gaze along the different lines at top speed. He knew that any mageweft array had to require three important materials, namely magic nodes, magic pathways 1, and the source of mana. "Nope, this doesn't look like a mageweft array," Lin Li muttered as he shook his head after looking at the formation on the wall. If it's really a mageweft array, then the arrangement of the source of mana and the magic nodes is really terrible. Apart from the mess, how could the source of mana and magic nodes be placed so far away from one another? Even if one were to use a legendary magical crystal as the source of mana, it wouldn't withstand such a great exhaustion of mana. Being developed as a subject together with traditional magic, there were many places that the study of mageweft and traditional magic complemented each other. In fact, magewefts were as rigorous as traditional magic. Furthermore, as mageweft had always been a mainstream subject, there were naturally many people who studied them. As a result, there were plenty of chances people could make refinements to them. Up to the current generation, there had already been thousands of interpretations developed for dozens of theories. Together with the innumerable formulae derived over time, the subject had long been perfected. Lin Li was wondering if there was a possibility for the arrangement on the wall to be a mageweft array, but the inscriptor of the system would have to be a horrible apprentice. Such a design would only be seen in the work of the newbies. The level of mess and tedious details had caused the magewefts to lose their original simplicity and gracefulness. Of course, this would be impossible. How could Osric, who had engaged innumerable manpower and resources, as well as the magic legion to take all precautions against attacks, decide to create such a trashy mageweft array? It would really be a joke. Osric might not be as well versed as Lin Li across the different occupations, but he was the great leader of the High Elves. How could he be unable to find any inscription talents? "Kanoris, can you tell what's happening on this wall?" Lin Li asked Kanoris casually. "Nope. In fact, the design looks rather aesthetic." "Are you thinking too much? What if these are just beautiful patterns?" Kanoris sounded guilty when he said that. Frankly speaking, he knew that Osric was not a man who pursued luxury. Hence, he had to have his reasons for arranging the magewefts in such a manner. If these were mere decoration, it would be a waste to use so many magic-resistant gems on the wall. Lin Li shook his head, and did not blame Kanoris for his lack of knowledge. After all, he did not expect there to be a legitimate answer. But that reminded him of the purported mageweft arrays that people discovered on the 4 alchemy colossuses. Lin Li thought that it might be the alchemy array on the 4 figures instead, as it was something that could provide the alchemy colossuses with a source of energy. Lin Li knew that despite being an ancient deity, it was impossible for Kanoris to be an expert in everything. He was content with the information he had acquired. The source of mana would make sense if it was the alchemy array, yet when Lin Li tried to look at all the patterns in detail, he gradually frowned. Even though he had never seen a real alchemy array, his knowledge and the basic theory behind it was really solid. However, the patterns before his eyes were very different. He wasn't able to form any connections between them and the theories. It would be useless trash even if it was an alchemy array on the wall. If Lin Li were any common man who considered that, he would be finding ways to acquire these gems. However, Lin Li subconsciously felt that even if there was no sign of energy in the seemingly harmless wall, it might not be appropriate for him to act so recklessly. Lin Li lowered his head and closed his eyes gently. Although he stopped looking at the patterns on the wall, he put his fingers on the bridge of his nose, deep in thought. He didn't believe that Osric would leave behind a useless pattern on the wall. If it was neither a ManhwaRecap array nor an alchemy array, what could it be? Apart from the sound of Lin Li's breathing, the entire secret chamber was filled with silence. While the two undead creatures never dared to disturb the thought process of their master, Kanoris, who felt guilty, similarly did not want to make any noise in Lin Li's mind. Lin Li organized the information he'd gathered about the underground palace. In fact, there wasn't any mention of the underground palace in the diary Jirian told him about. The parts about how there had been valuable objects and important construction works being conducted in the place were mere guesses. Not only did it seem that there might not be any useful information from the diary, Lin Li felt that the author of the diary was unsure if Osric was building an underground palace or it was only a one-time transportation of goods. Although the place was the Breezy Plains, the Dragon Mountains weren't named in the diary. Hence, Lin Li did not have high hopes about gaining any information about the interior of the palace. He knew that if he couldn't verify the information Jirian told him, it would be a waste of time to delve into the matter. After all, there were too many legends that circulated over thousands of years. There were people who tried to verify those tales arduously, but were turned into fools by the others. Gradually, no one cared about such stories anymore. Lin Li was certain that Jirian was not the first person to have read the diary in the thousand of years. The content of the diary was full of vague hypotheses. Anyone would have deemed it as something created to trick people. However, now that Lin Li had found the underground palace, he could be sure that its author had to be somebody who had lived in the past. Then, might he be able to glean some clues from the diary? Although Jirian did not bring the original diary with him, he had written down all of its contents based on his memory into a notebook and passed it to Lin Li when they parted ways. Did I miss any information? Lin Li thought as he took out that notebook and flipped through it casually, despite the fact that he had already remembered all of its contents. Suddenly, his hand stopped, and a smile appeared on his face. Although the diary did not have a detailed description of the events, there was something he could use a diary to ascertain: the dates. Dates were to be in any diary entry. Yet, what was the use of knowing the date the underground palace had been established? The underground palace had been built a century before the extinction of the High Elves. Lin Li could remember reading from a book, titled The Book of the Forgotten, that the previously unknown study of the magic gears that did not enjoy much importance had been popular for a period of time then. Although no one could verify the origin of the magic gears, most people believed there to be a relationship between the study of magic gears and alchemy, or that both of them originated from the Goblins' era. Indeed, there were a lot of technical skills necessary to produce the well-known alchemy colossuses that were related to magic gears. There was also a product from the application of the magic gears, called the gear puppets. From their appearance, they resembled the alchemy colossuses, yet both items had vastly different powers. The energy of the alchemy colossuses came from the numerous alchemy arrays on their bodies. Each array was responsible for different types of functions, and the area on magic attack and defense was just one of them. The alchemy arrays were in charge of many fundamental functions that included the drive for the movement of the colossuses, which would be similar to human muscles. With that, there were the gear puppets that used gears and the force of transmission to replace some of the basic alchemy arrays. The main mechanism was not magic, but the gears. Unlike most of the people in mainland Amril who saw it as unorthodox, Lin Li was really familiar and comfortable with them. Of course, this special characteristic made the absolute distinction between the puppets and the colossuses. To most people, the study of magic gears was useless. They'd rather pay a lower price for their servants, whom they could easily find. What was the use of those boring gear puppets? It was this perspective that turned the study of magic gears into a disdained one. Hence, in the world of magic civilization, such a skill set had little demand despite it being novel. If not, the civilization of Amril would have been on a different path. In reality, the gear puppets were only one of the many basic applications in the study of magic gears. Conservation of energy was a very unique advantage of magic gears. While it might sound absurd, it was really powerful under special circumstances. Both Manhwa arrays and alchemy arrays depended on magical crystals for energy. The effects of Manhwa arrays and alchemy arrays, however, would decrease as time passed due to the weakening of any magical crystals, regardless of their initial strength. When it finally reached its lowest threshold, beyond the needed amount for activation, it would be as good as opening the door wide for any enemy inside. As compared to those arrays, the effects of magic gears would never dwindle as long as they were deactivated. Magic gears could unleash their original effects, despite the passing of time. Hence, they would be rather useful when it came to protecting tombs. If it were real magic gear, then the wall of magic-resistant gems would not be a challenge to Lin Li. When he used the Scroll of Wishes to wish for all of his life skills to be raised by one level, although he did not manage to raise his skills in magic gears to the guru level, it was pushed to the master level together with his knowledge in minerals. The master level was sufficient for making Lin Li a real talent in such a forgotten area of study. Lin Li went back to the wall and started recalling everything he knew about magic gears. He inspected the wall very carefully. The change in perspective helped him to have a clearer view of the situation. Lin Li was really grateful that it did not require any knowledge beyond his abilities. There were two ways to destroy those magic gears. 1. Settle it once and for all, locate and damage the energy source. Without the source of energy, the magic gears would naturally be deactivated. 2. Outweed all the traps, either deduce all the loopholes of the magic gears, or activate the traps prematurely to eliminate them. However, Lin Li chose to settle the issue once and for all. He felt that it would be more realistic for him to locate and damage the source of the energy so as to prevent future implications. Usually, people would think that the long-living amethyst turtles would be best sources of energy. The amethyst turtles were considered one of the magical beasts with the longest lifespan in Amril. People had discovered a 70,000 years old amethyst turtle in the vestige of the titans that had lived through the years. Of course, that amethyst turtle was not any source of energy for the magic gears then, but a titan's pet. The amethyst turtles were very powerful. Those that were older than 20,000 years old would be able to reach the legendary realm, the peak of their potential. They would never get to enter the sanctuary realm even if they were to live another 200,000 years. Their temperament was much gentler than any other legendary beasts, which made them incredibly easy catch. Hence, Lin Li could tell that 9 out of 10 trap makers would use amethyst turtles as the core of the mechanism. The last trap maker might have had some bad luck, being unable to find an amethyst turtle. Since the underground palace was built by Osric, Lin Li believed that the supply of energy would not be weaker than one legendary-level amethyst turtle. Therefore, how could he let go of such an invaluable treasure? Despite not having any source of mana or magic pathways, there still were traces that helped Lin Li deduce the setup. Although the installation of gears and chains had been intentionally hidden from sight, they were sufficient to lead a gear master like Lin Li to its energy source. As Lin Li paced around the wall, he scrutinized every line on it, and made huge calculations. Finally, a bulb lit up in his mind. He stepped out of the secret chamber and followed the clues. Although Uchvalusi and Norfeller could not understand why their master left the secret chamber, they followed him without a word. By now, both were rather crestfallen. The inability to help their master made them feel like they had failed as Lin Li's followers. After following the clues given by the magic gears, and walking past a few rooms, Lin Li found a room filled with useless junk in the basement. However, Everything was displayed in an orderly fashion, without even a hint of disarray. "Move those things away," said Lin Li as he pointed to the pile of trash by the wall. Uchfalusi and Norfeller took action immediately. The wait for instruction had finally ended. After clearing the junk, the wall was in full view. To common people, the wall might be an ordinary one. However, nothing could hide from Lin Li's eyes. He was an expert in magic gears. Lin Li found a discreet door behind the pile of trash very quickly. On the surface, it seemed that there was nothing special about that door. Yet, Lin Li knew very clearly that the magic gears functioning behind it were enough to claim the life of any archmage. After getting through the secret door, Lin Li noticed another passageway sloping downward behind it. The passageway was pitch black and incredibly narrow. It was large enough to fit only one person. Norfeller decided to take the initiative for the team. "Master, let me help to survey this place," said Norfeller as he walked to the front. Lin Li smiled and waved his hands. "You wouldn't be able to help in this. Just stay here and wait for me to come back." He let out a magic solar sphere that levitated in front of him and started to venture forward. It was not Lin Li's kindness that prevented him from letting his followers survey the place for him. The main reason for his rejection was his belief that there was no need for them to do so. Through his experience in dealing with the magic gears earlier on, he had gained the confidence to deal with more of them if any appeared. Lin Li felt that it would only implicate the matter at hand if he were to let Norfeller, who was clueless about the mechanism, into this area first. Uchfalusi and Norfeller gave each other a disappointed and helpless glance as they watched their master disappear into the passageway. Although Norfeller was not dissatisfied with Lin Li's decision, he could not help but feel disappointed. He remembered how he could still help his master get rid of some trouble when he started out as a level 17 vampire. But, as his master became more powerful, the enemies they faced became more challenging as well. He felt that his identity of a level 17 vampire was getting really useless. As compared to Norfeller, Uchfalusi should not have felt any disappointment. After all, he was a lich that fell from the legendary realm. He knew very well that it would take him another 2 or 3 months to recover his lost power. At the start, he thought that he would be of a tremendous help to his master when he returned to the legendary realm. However, after following the man for a period of time, and seeing how rapidly he made progress, Uchfalusi's conviction started to waver. Actually, it was not a bad thing that his master was a powerful being. The stronger the master, the easier the rewards came to the followers. Yet, only people who had no dreams would settle for such a life. Although both of them were undead creatures, they had the minds of humans, and had the desire for fame and recognition like most humans. Since it was fated that their master was going to leave a huge mark on the history of the mainland of Anril, it would only be natural that, as his followers, they'd be able to leave their own names there as well. However, a prerequisite was that they had to be well known and gain the chance to display their ability in front of the public. At the same time, Uchfalusi feared that he would be condemned by posterity the minute he showed his face to the public. Therefore, the only way for him to gain fame was to raise his power. Then, he would be able to leave his name in his master's story. Lin Li was clueless that his 2 undead followers had such great dreams. After entering the passageway, he walked along the narrow path. Indeed, it was filled with multiple precarious magic gears and traps. If it were anyone else, even experts of magic gears, they might not have the ability to walk through a few of them. Apart from the magic gears, there were also traps created by mageweth and alchemy arrays. These traps were incredibly insidious. If it had been a team that entered this place, they might still be able to bring one expert in magic gears. However, the size of the passageway was only sufficient for one person to pass through, and not everyone would be proficient in all the unfamiliar domains that were involved. That would endanger the experts at magic gears and other domains in the team easily. Unfortunately, these magic gears and traps posed no threat to Lin Li. He understood that before he could gain the control of the core of the magic gears, the key was to trigger and suspend the traps intentionally. To Lin Li, his guru-level skills in magic gears made him immune to all these traps. Despite the fact that much effort had been put in to set them up, it was totally useless against Lin Li, merely delaying him. The traps that utilized the ManhwaRecap and alchemy arrays were even more useless. As Lin Li was a guru in ManhwaRecap, alchemy arrays were even simpler for him to deal with. After all, he had in his possession a tool to dissolve alchemy arrays. The journey was a long and arduous one. After approximately an hour and a few turns, Lin Li spotted ahead of him a glow that seemed like the end of the secret passageway. However, Lin Li did not dash towards it immediately. He felt that it would be too reckless to do that. Indeed, as he moved closer to the end, Lin Li was met with more and more traps that grew increasingly complicated. Hence, it took him more than half an hour to finish the last part of his journey. When Lin Li reached the end of the passageway, he was really jubilant, until the smell of something hot and pungent rushed up his nostrils. Lin Li saw bright and yellow lava bubbling underneath his feet. He was standing in the tunnel of a spacious underground cave. This was a world of fire. There was a huge concentration of fire element, and it was as though he had stepped into a natural magical domain filled with flames. The fire element here was so strong that it suppressed the other elements. Lin Li even had difficulty activating his mental strength in that environment. Wait a minute, this is not a place that the amethyst turtles could live in. Could it be that Osric had other magical beasts more suitable than the amethyst turtles to act as the energy source for the magic gears? Lin Li could not help but feel that he was in a strange place. While the lifespan of the amethyst turtles was extremely long, they needed a particular environment as well. Being magical beasts with the water attribute, the amethyst turtles should be placed in an underground river where they could live for more than 100,000 years. In such an environment that was suffused with fire element, however, amethyst turtles would not be able to survive. It was impossible for Osric to commit such a mistake or fail to capture a legendary level amethyst turtle. There had to have been a more suitable choice for Osric. However, as Lin Li went through his entire memory bank, he could not think of any magical beast with fire attribute that had a longer life than the amethyst turtle. Among the 7 major elements, the fire element was the most vigorous one. Hence, fire attacks were always the strongest among other types of attack at the same level. Their violent nature caused the magical beasts with the fire attribute to have a shorter lifespan as compared to those with the water attribute. Under most circumstances, magic gears would be used to protect places for a prolonged period of time. Therefore, it was more important for one to find a magical beast that had a long lifespan rather than one that was the most powerful. If not, the magic gears would be wasted with the death of any beast. What magical beast could it be? Lin Li thought as he flew out of the passageway with the power of flight. Lin Li was shocked by Osric's fortune after he scrutinized the surroundings carefully. The energy source chosen by the High Lord indeed had great powers and a long lifespan. Osric's choice was not something normal people would dare to think of. A crimson dragon that had its wings penetrated by 18 chains was growling and struggling on a platform at the center of the lava river. It was trapped on a black platform 1,000 meters square in size. From its craftsmanship, Lin Li could tell that the stone platform was made artificially. Despite being only as thin as a human wrist, the chains seemed relatively thick against the thin body of the crimson dragon. Although the dragon's struggle resulted in loud noises from the chains, they showed no signs of loosening up. Deafening noises also came from the black platform following the dragon's movements. Although it sounded like the platform could shatter any time, Lin Li knew that it was not because it was weak. The gears within it were converting the force of the crimson dragon into energy. How did Osric think of letting such a crimson dragon become the energy source for his magic gears? While Lin Li was stunned by what he saw, he could not help but gasp at Osric's wealth again. For the gears to function for 1,000 or 1,000,000 years, the dragon with a great lifespan would be a very good choice. While the dragons had similar lifespan as compared to the amethyst turtles, dragons were much more powerful. Furthermore, there was another advantage to that crimson dragon acting as the energy source for the magic gears. It helped to delay intruders who were here to destroy the mechanism. Not to mention, the power of an adult dragon in such an environment was not what an amethyst turtle could compare to. the lava cave was an optimal place for crimson dragons to live in. The high concentration of fire element not only acted as an immediate and unlimited source of energy for the dragon to replenish what it lost, but it was also a great help in extending its lifespan. If not for the 18 chains that penetrated its wings, the crimson dragon might really love to live in such an environment. No one knew if Osric's intention behind the construction of the magic gears was to make use of the crimson dragon, or if Osric captured a crimson dragon just to build those magic gears. This question was akin to the philosophical debate about whether eggs came before chickens. Lin Li, however, was not interested in mulling over this question. However, since it was a crimson dragon used as the source of energy, Lin Li believed that it wouldn't supply only the magic gears in the wall. He knew that the energy of the dragon was more than sufficient to support an entire underground palace filled with magic gears. When he thought of that, Lin Li was stunned. He realized that although he had met many undead creatures on his way, their abilities were way too lousy to be the guards of the palace. This meant that it was not only possible that the palace would be filled with magic gears, but rather that it had to be so. Lin Li was secretly glad that he actually used the warlock's eyes to survey the place before he laid his hands on those treasures. If not, he would have activated those magic gears unknowingly. He felt that it was really insidious for Osric to use the unpopular magic gears to defend the underground palace. If it were other people, they wouldn't have thought of the magic gears. Even if they did, who would have the confidence to deactivate them? After all, there was still a crimson dragon that acted as their energy source. In fact, Lin Li knew that he had made a mistake. He did not expect Osric to use magic gears in that underground palace. Although he was at the master level when it came to magic gears, it was such an unfamiliar and unpopular study that he had no confidence in finding anyone in Anril who was proficient in it. The current situation exceeded Lin Li's expectation. He did not expect to see a crimson dragon. Being the direct descendant of the 4 dragon aspects, the crimson dragon was born with a fire attribute, and had an ability above level 21. This would make deactivating the mechanism really challenging if Lin Li wanted to deal with it starting from the energy source. Oh, it's the crimson dragon. I'm really fearful of your luck. We have met a retribution knight outside, and now, it's a pure-blooded crimson dragon. Kenora's snicker sounded in Lin Li's mind. He had always been jealous of Lin Li's luck. After all, Kenora's had experienced a terrible time in the past. The comparison between himself and Lin Li made him really frustrated. Should I retreat? If I chose not to deal with this crimson dragon, I would be wasting the time I've spent dealing with all the magic gears outside. Lin Li thought as he dispersed the glowing solar spheres. He took out his magic staff from the ring of endless storm, and flew towards the crimson dragon. Hey, what are you trying to do? That is an adult dragon. Are you out of your mind? Kenora shrieked on the sight of Lin Li's apparent intention to challenge the crimson dragon. He was shocked. How would he be able to get a new body when Lin Li always risked his life for such matters? I say, please do not dig your own grave. Why would you want to provoke that dude? I'm pitiful enough to be trapped like a coolie here. While the crimson dragon might not be stronger than the Lin Li and Tharlan, Kenoris had no confidence that Lin Li could battle the crimson dragon himself. After all, they were out in the endless abyss. Kenoris could not make use of the laws of the abyss and his ancient demonic runes to help Lin Li anymore. However, Lin Li had set his mind on the matter, ignoring Kenoris's warnings. He waved his magic staff as he flew to give himself an elemental protection. Colorful solar spheres revolved around his body like lively pixies. Lin Li did not choose to challenge the crimson dragon because he thought it was a pushover. It was not that he was a lunatic either. While the solving of the magic gears took the trapmaster some time, it was not a bit dangerous, and he gained nothing out of it. While it was indeed dangerous for him to challenge the crimson dragon, there were also massive potential benefits that enticed Lin Li. The first would be combat experience. Although Lin Li had managed to enter the legendary realm, compared to the old-timers like Sendros and Anduin, he was lacking a lot of battling experience. It was too difficult for him to meet suitable opponents or find the old men to practice with him. Hence, the exchange with the Crimson Dragon would be a rare opportunity for Lin Li. Another reason was less honorable. To Lin Li, the Crimson Dragon was not only a dragon, but also a living treasury from its head to its tail, and from its skin to its bones. Although the Crimson Dragon was more powerful than the amethyst turtle, its value was not to be belittled. How could Lin Li give up easily? Suddenly, the struggling and growling Crimson Dragon fell silent. There was a hint of seriousness reflected in his eyes. It knew that a mage in the legendary realm was not an insignificant human. Despite being a proud dragon, it dared not be reckless in front of a legendary mage. In the past, legendary powerhouses treated killing dragons as an honorable deed to be recorded in their life stories. People who were less able would approach the dragons with impure blood. It was akin to how the immortal king headed for the dragon of destruction directly. The Crimson Dragon could feel that the human who had just flown out of the precipice was an incredibly strong legendary mage. Although the scent emitted by that human was less powerful than himself, he knew very well that human beings were the most cunning creatures on earth. Are you not going to negotiate with him? It doesn't look like he hopes to fight with you. Who knows, you might convince him. Kanoris persuaded Lin Li enthusiastically, hoping it would help him understand the situation more clearly, and not attract unnecessary trouble. However, Kanoris's efforts vanished the moment the dragon breathed out a puff of dragon fire. Hey, did you see that? He spat saliva at me. I can't tolerate this. Of course, Lin Li was only joking with Kanoris. He dodged the Crimson Dragon's flames with agility, and waved the magic staff in his hands. A spell was cast instantaneously, aiming for the dragon beneath him. Actually, Lin Li had another advantage. Unlike Lin Li, who had the ability to fly freely in the sky, the poor Crimson Dragon was like a malicious hound chained in the garden. He could only let nasty children outside his reach throw pebbles at him helplessly. Of course, this Crimson Dragon was more capable than unfriendly dogs. He could spit. Hold on. He also had the flame domain. The Crimson Dragon lifted his head to roar. Powerful magical waves spread all over the place as the dragon unleashed its flame domain. The flames spread wildly and engulfed the entire underground cave. As the environment itself was already a natural magical domain of fire, the activation of the dragon's domain only made the scale and impact of his powers even stronger. The lava around the black platform bubbled vigorously. Hundreds of flying dragons formed with the red lava flapped their wings and flew towards Lin Li. These lava dragons were at least 1,000 degrees Celsius hot. Lin Li was reminded of when he used angels of light and dark to surround the Lord of Darkness back in the Throne of Darkness, except he was now the one being surrounded. The only thing that comforted him was the fact that these lava dragons were nowhere as beautiful as the angels of light and dark that he had created. Lin Li held his magic staff and swept it across in a circle in front of him with the magical crystal on the tip of it facing outwards. A dozen lava dragons that had been charging at him were immediately frozen and fell into the lava river by the side. However, the frozen lava dragons did not even completely submerge in the river before they were thawed by the high temperature and flew up again. In fact, there was no one element in Anrel that could absolutely counter another element directly. However, it was normal for the elements of fire and water to have the ability to overwhelm each other. That being said, the surroundings were heavily concentrated with fire element due to the lava river. It helped to raise the powers of the dragon greatly. The humorous WYRM that Lin Li had sealed into the summoning lamp could not actually be considered a WYRM. It was merely an undead creature that possessed the skeleton of a WYRM and a dragon crystal. The dragon's power was only from the dragon crystal as well as the remnant WYRM aura left on the WYRM skeleton. Lin Li felt as though his limbs were bound fighting in such a situation as he had to do his best to defend against the powerful dragon while devoting more effort to adjusting the other magical elements apart from the fire element. Fire element magic did not cause any harm to a pure-blooded crimson dragon, hence, the abundant fire element was not only useless to Lin Li, but also posed a great hindrance. Perhaps this gave the crimson dragon the home base advantage, however, Lin Li had an advantage as well. He was able to fly around as he pleased, while the crimson dragon was like a dog chained in the yard, unable to do anything about the children throwing stones at it because it was limited by the length of the chain. Only, this crimson dragon could do more than just gross others out by spitting, it could actually kill with it. Even though Lin Li had legendary powers now, his shield could not hold up for longer than a few seconds in the face of the crimson dragon's fiery breath. The only thing Lin Li could do was to employ his honed power of flight to circle around the crimson dragon. Abruptly halting, suddenly changing directions. Lin Li's movements were not graceful. In fact, he looked clumsy as he dodged the fatal dragon's breath time and time again only in the nick of time. Despite that, the spells he cast while dodging the crimson dragon's attacks would always hit the crimson dragon without fail. Unfortunately, the crimson dragon was too resistant to the impact of spells, thus, none of them seemed to have any effect on it. The explosion of spells and the crimson dragon's howls rang in the cave as the situation became tense. Nobody could say for sure how long this tense situation could last, since it seemed like Lin Li might be engulfed by the dragon's breath at any time as he weaved around in the air. Then, the crimson dragon on the black stone platform at the bottom seemed to have started breathing fire. Well, anyone would be annoyed to the point of breathing fire if there was a fly that wouldn't stop flying around them. Roar! The slow-flowing lava surrounding the black stone platform turned boiling hot following the roar of the dragon, and the temperature in the cave began rising. The yellow lava turned blinding silver so quickly that the change was visible to the naked eye. It was a sign that the temperature was reaching an extreme. Flame domain. The crimson dragon threw its head back, roaring once again as the powerful magical wave spread out in all directions. The flame domain expanded in an instant and engulfed the whole cave. The network of tiny cracks on the glossy, mirror-like walls of the cave disappeared as the walls were melded together once again by the high temperatures. The environment in the cave was already like a natural flame domain before, thus, when the crimson dragon's flame domain was unleashed in such circumstances, it would exponentially increase both in range and power. The lava around the black stone platform continued churning like waves in an ocean as flying dragons formed with the silver lava flew into the sky, flapping their wings as they charged towards Lin Li. These lava dragons were at least level 15 each and their temperature was 1000 degrees Celsius. While one or two of them was nothing much, it was a sight to behold with hundreds of them appearing at once. Lin Li was reminded of when he used angels of light and dark to surround the Lord of Darkness back in the Throne of Darkness, except he was now the one being surrounded. The only thing that comforted him was the fact that these lava dragons were nowhere as beautiful as the angels of light and dark that he had created. Lin Li held his magic staff and swept it across in a circle in front of him with the magical crystal on the tip of it facing outwards. A dozen lava dragons that had been charging at him were immediately frozen and fell into the lava river by the side. However, the frozen lava dragons did not even completely submerge in the river before they were thawed by the high temperature and flew up again. There was no absolute order in which the major elements that constituted the world of Amril triumphed over each other. The water element might dominate fire element, but it was also common for the fire element to oppress water element when it was at its peak. As a lava river flowed beneath the ground here, the density of fire element here was high, which allowed the crimson dragon's flame domain to become even more powerful. Damn it, this is its home base and I am unable to lure it away. Lin Li said to himself angrily as he dodged the lava dragons. Fire element magic did not work on the crimson dragon, and now ice element magic was being suppressed as well that he could not even unleash his frost domain here. He wanted to lure the dragon away, yet it was chained here. Well, the dragon would have fled long ago if it could instead of working like a slave here. As a descendant of the four dragon aspects, the crimson dragon was born possessing the flame domain. The frost domain used the basic rule that constituted the world, and the flame element was the most violent and aggressive out of all the major elements. In comparison, Lin Li's frost domain was weaker, and on top of that, they were in an environment that could be considered a natural flame domain. In such circumstances, the crimson dragon that had been chained up for 1000 years was likely comparable to level 24 in power. I already told you not to trifle with it, anyway, it won't be able to chase after you, so we should go back and think of something else. Kanoris was very worried even though he knew Lin Li could not be killed that easily. Still, they were facing an adult crimson dragon, and besides, it was far more dangerous here than in the Throne of Darkness. Since it can't catch me, I'm going to see who gives up first. How is it so difficult to deal with even though it is chained up? Lin Li unleashed 1,000 miles of ice, which caused dozens of other lava dragons to drop from the sky. No other legendary mage, not even those at the peak of the legendary realm, would dare stay any longer if they had to face off with a crimson dragon in a place so densely filled with fire element. Only Lin Li would dare do this as he did not have to worry about mana depletion due to his insane amount of mental strength. Of course, Lin Li did not really mean to fight with the crimson dragon to the end, as the crimson dragon still had the advantage of fighting in an advantageous environment and would not give in so easily even though Lin Li had insane mental strength and did not have to worry about mana depletion. If they were to really fight it out, who knew how long that would take? Brute force alone would not work if he was going to deal with this crimson dragon. Lin Li weaved through the air as quickly as lightning while the gears in his head turned at an equally fast speed, trying to come up with a way to get rid of the crimson dragon. If anybody could hear Lin Li's thoughts now, they would be sure to burst out in laughter as it was simply daydreaming. Even Kanoris, who had seen Lin Li make many miraculous feats, did not believe that he would be able to think of a way to get rid of the crimson dragon. He had to be near the sanctuary realm to do that. Still, humans were the ones who came up with all these brilliant ideas, and the knowledge in Lin Li's head was put to good use now. A vague idea surfaced in his head, and after a vast amount of calculations, it gradually became clearer. However, there was more to the crimson dragon than just that. While lava dragons continued to appear and fly into the air, the lava river beneath them turned a brilliant gold, and a huge whirlpool began to form on the surface of the river. The golden whirlpool was an enchanting sight, but it was as pretty as it was deadly. Something huge was brewing, and in an instant, the fire element in the air became more and more violent, everything was getting distorted. Moreover, it wasn't the only whirlpool. Kanoris had stopped persuading Lin Li to stop, and merely weakly remarked, "Hey, be careful. It's dragon language magic." Dragon language magic was an innate magic of the WYRMS1 and one of the oldest magic in the world as well. It was quite like the demonic runes that Kanoris had mentioned. However, while it was old, it was not obsolete, as it was actually simpler than magic that used High Elf's print and human languages. In short, it was a more direct understanding and use of the rules of the elements. As a descendant of the dragon aspects, the Crimson Dragon used a dragon language magic that was even purer and closer to the original form of the magic and main source of the elemental power. The giant whirlpools on the lava river seemed to have a life of their own as they receded before suddenly exploding. Blinding balls of silver shot out from the center of the whirlpools at a speed that could not be matched by the lava dragons. They were basically cannonballs. Lin Li glanced at the top of the cave as he dodged the cannons, suddenly recalling a game he had played before he time-traveled, marble throwing. The balls of fire element cannons landed on the ceiling of the cave and immediately burst into flames before the sparks fell down like rain. Lin Li weaved through the lava cannons like a fly, and while it was dangerous, Lin Li avoided the projectiles so expertly using his flight skills that not even the corners of his clothes were burned. He started to do things that looked pointless, like shooting magic at the balls of lava. Sometimes, he attacked those that were flying towards him, but at other times, he attacked those that were flying a distance away, confusing Kanoris to no end. "Hey, what are you doing? Leave quickly, can't you practice your magic somewhere else?" Kanoris yelled. "Shut up, you'll see." Lin Li did not give any explanation as he stubbornly continued what he was doing. While the Crimson Dragon was chained up, it still called the shots in the world of flames. Soon, the entire cave was covered in a layer of lava. It trickled down all the way from the ceiling to the cave walls, making it seem as though the entire cave was melting. As the light and the darkness rules depended on the holy light and the gloomy dark, and neither was a domain that Lin Li mastered, the dragon had to be lured out using the frost domain as a foundation to create a magical domain of frost, light, and darkness. However, if he were to unleash his frost domain in this world of fire, he would be swarmed by lava dragons and lava cannonballs even before the ice had solidified. His frost domain would be dissolved into nothing by the large amount of fire element in an instant. Hence, Lin Li was not in a hurry to use his magical domain, and only used normal ice element magic to attack the restrained Crimson Dragon instead. Or perhaps it was more fitting to say that he was provoking the Crimson Dragon and causing it to use more fire element magic to attack him. While he seemed kind of clumsy trying to dodge all the fire element magic thrown at him by the Crimson Dragon, this was all part of his plan. While the Crimson Dragon's magic seemed endless as its attacks chased Lin Li around in the air, Lin Li's levitation spell had already been similar to the effect of the power of flight even when he was still an archmage. Now that he was truly a legendary mage, his power of flight was far more powerful than most other legendary mages. He twisted and turned in the air and performed many difficult stunts, and the Crimson Dragon's magic that seemed to fill the air could not even touch the hems of his clothes. With one flying in the air and the other shooting from the ground, the tense situation lasted 2 days, just like that. Perhaps the Crimson Dragon was tired of such a boring game of shooting, but the frequency at which it shot at Lin Li finally started to decrease. Lin Li detected this with his accurate senses, and inwardly shouted, "Here's my chance." He suddenly dived and flew towards the Crimson Dragon, holding out his magic staff as the magical crystal glowed brightly. Meanwhile, he chanted an incredibly condensed form of a chant quickly in a sharp voice. 1,000 miles of ice, 1,000 miles of ice. In less than a minute, Lin Li released over 100,000 miles of ice consecutively using his almost limitless mental strength and insane way of condensing chants. While a single 1,000 miles of ice was nothing to the Crimson Dragon, over 100 of them stacked together brought about such a sharp decrease in temperature that its flame domain fell apart in an instant. The sudden drop in temperature caused the slowly flowing golden lava to cease and turn into black igneous rocks. Not only did the cave lose its heat, but the solidifying of the lava and the flames being extinguished also caused the cave to plunge into darkness. The sudden drop in temperature caused the slowly flowing golden lava to cease and turn into black igneous rocks. Not only did the cave lose its heat, but the solidifying of the lava and the flames being extinguished also caused the cave to plunge into darkness. As the Wyrm was incredibly hardy, the bite of mana did not cause much harm to it, but the damage caused by the destruction of its magical domain was something that even a Wyrm could not take. As the flame domain was destroyed, the Crimson Dragon whimpered, and the chains on its fleshy wings rattled sadly. Lin Li was aware that this would not last long, as only the lava surface was hardened. The fire element would soon regain its position as the dominant element, and given the Crimson Dragon's ability, it would only need a short while to recover from the damage. However, even an instant was enough as the magical domain of frost, light, and darkness spread out immediately, looming over the Crimson Dragon as it did so. If you're enjoying my content, please consider donating a coffee. Or checking out my shirts on TeePublic. As Lin Li hovered opposite the Crimson Dragon, snowflakes fell slowly and formed a thick layer over the black stone platform in the blink of an eye. Beyond the black stone platform, even though the lava had already hardened into rocks, the snowflakes that fell upon it still could not survive as they were turned into steam immediately, forming a thick layer of steam around the black stone platform. The Crimson Dragon howled as it struggled, its cries deafeningly loud as they shook up the world. How it wished that time would stop for a second so that it could recover from the damage it had suffered, but unfortunately, time continued to pass like the most cruel curse, taking away its life as it did so. Lin Li would not have mercy now. While he did not know how Osric had managed to make this Crimson Dragon work as a slave here, he did know that as the descendant of a dragon aspect, it would not swallow its pride to submit to him and take him as the owner or anything like that. It wasn't the angels of light and dark that Kanoris had started becoming familiar with that appeared next to Lin Li now. It was a black-robed freak that carried a sickle and wore a wide-brimmed hat that hid his face. While there was only one, it was so massive that it was nearly as big as the Crimson Dragon. Kanoris, who could not contain his curiosity, asked, "Hey, where did your bird people go?" "What's this?" Lin Li raised his eyebrow lightly and smiled. "This? I call him the Bearer of Death." The Bearer of Death waved his sickle and dived towards the Crimson Dragon, slitting its throat using the sickle. However, there was no wound when he did so, and only a blurry shadow was drawn out by the sickle. That was the soul of the Crimson Dragon. With a pounce, the bearer of death gulped down the soul of the Crimson Dragon before it dissipated into the magical domain. You learned this from Mephistos, right? Can't believe you actually managed to tire out the Crimson Dragon, Kenora said with a tinge of awe in his voice. Tire out? It wouldn't be tired out even if we carried this on for another 2 months, Lin Li said as he looked at the carcass of the Crimson Dragon gleefully, not bothering to tell Kenoris what was the true reason behind it. It was quite simple, actually. He was not just a mage, but an all-around master who was at least of a master level in fields like potions, forging, magewiths, and alchemy. Nobody knew magical element theories like he did. After elements were sequenced and the magic was released, the elements that resulted in the magic would be released again after the restraints were lifted. This endless cycle of recycling of elements allowed mages to have a never-ending supply of elements to use. Otherwise, there would be a great imbalance in magical elements if mages generally preferred a certain elemental magic. However, the magical elements that had just taken part in releasing a magic spell would be inert for a period, and only after this period passed could these magical elements join the elemental sequencing again to release magic. As the fire element was the most violent, fire element magic had always been regarded as the most powerful of all. But few knew that fire element also had the longest inert period after taking part in releasing a spell. Lin Li kept using ice element magic to provoke the Crimson Dragon and circled it intentionally while using magic seemingly aimlessly to intercept the Crimson Dragon's magic. If all the spots at which the Crimson Dragon's spells ended were marked, one would realize that they formed a hemisphere around the Crimson Dragon. The Crimson Dragon was unable to leave, and was at the center of a hemisphere formed by inert fire element which hindered the entrance of active fire elements. This made casting spells increasingly difficult and lessened the suppressive effect it had on Lin Li's frost domain. Hence, Lin Li took the chance and used over 100,000 miles of ice to suppress the surround fire element as best as he could before unleashing his frost domain to destroy the Crimson Dragon's frost domain. Then, he used the bearer of death to swallow its soul. While it sounded simple, nobody besides Lin Li would be able to accomplish this even if they knew of this method. It was easy to understand the nature of the fire element inert period and set up a trap aiming for it. This was all knowledge that could be learned and replicated, but there was one thing that nobody else could replicate. That was to cast the 1,000 miles of ice over 100 times in less than a minute. The inert period of fire element would not last forever, and if one was not able to create an environment that was advantageous to themselves before the inert period of the fire element ended, then all of this was empty talk. Only Lin Li was able to cast so many 1,000 miles of ice in such a short time using his insane mental strength and create an environment that was ideal for his frost domain. Kenoris was right regarding the part about devouring the Crimson Dragon's soul, however. While it was not Mephistos who taught him that, Lin Li did learn it from him. The Lord of Soul's soul fragment was sealed in the summoning lamp, anyway, and thus it was easy to retrieve information from it. The main reason why he chose to kill the Crimson Dragon by having its soul devoured was because he did not want to lose the valuable dragon blood. In such an environment that was densely filled with fire element, the dragon's blood would instantly be swallowed by the fire element before Lin Li could contain it in a flask. This Crimson Dragon's body is a real treasure, don't waste it. Kenoris was not bothered by the fact that he did not receive a reply from Lin Li, once again being in awe of Lin Li's luck. Duh. Why else do you think I went to such great trouble to deal with it? Lin Li stretched out his hand to tap at the Crimson Dragon's body. This was a priceless treasure indeed, and it was a blessing for it to end up in Lin Li's hands. If it were to land in someone else's hands, one mistake in handling it would have been a great insult to something so valuable. Only someone like him who was a master in almost every profession there was could skin and debone the Crimson Dragon's carcass properly without damaging it. Lin Li was not exaggerating at all. As the Crimson Dragon's carcass was very valuable, the methods needed to process the carcass properly were also very specific. It was not as easy as simply butchering a pig. He circled the carcass delightedly as he already started planning what he was going to do with it, deciding which parts would be best used to make potions, and which would be best used as ingredients for magewares or magical enchantments. You think I don't know what you're thinking? You're thinking that only you're able to make full use of this based on your capabilities, and that only in your hands would this not go to waste, right? Kanoris said with a tinge of mockery in his voice. Lin Li stopped before saying, "Why, am I wrong?" He did not think that anyone else in the world was more resourceful and knowledgeable than he was. Even if someone were to learn about every field, could they reach the level of a master like he had? The only way he managed to become a master at every aspect was thanks to the heaven-defying scroll of wishes. I knew it. Well, it's just tearing things into pieces. How much better do you think you can do, compared to someone else? Kanoris responded condescendingly instead. You mean that you have a better idea? Lin Li had always been quick to lower his stance as long as he had something to gain from it. Don't you have a humorous WYRM sealed in that summoning lamp? It was quite a decent helper to you in the past, but it has become increasingly obsolete now. It is still a humorous WYRM, though, and after losing the powerful body of the dragon it also lost much of its power and all its potential to evolve. Now that you have the Crimson Dragon's body, things will change. Lin Li did not have to press further now, as Kanoris would willingly offer any information that would benefit Lin Li now. This was because he understood Lin Li's personality very well after spending so much time together. It was no use forcing him or threatening him for help. Only if you willingly helped him and had Lin Li owe you a favor would he be forced to keep your matters in mind. This was what Kanoris concluded after spending time with Lin Li. It was all very simple indeed. If you wanted others to respect you, then you had to learn to respect others first. It was something easy to understand. Yet not many were capable of actually doing it. What do you mean? Lin Li was taken aback, and quickly asked, you're saying that the humorous WYRM can take on another body? The truth was exactly like what Kanoris had said. While the humorous WYRM sealed in the summoning lamp was a level 20, it was not very useful in a situation like the one earlier. The humorous WYRM's level did not reflect its power as it did not have the protection of scales and the powerful strength that a fleshly body would have. It was merely a rack of bones, or perhaps like an enlarged skeletal warrior. Hence, it was kind of tricky to use the humorous WYRM now. It was not of much help, yet it pained Lin Li to see it destroyed. A level 20 humorous WYRM was hard to come by, after all. But if he were to keep it and not use it, wouldn't it be as good as not having it? Of course. Kanoris said proudly. Don't forget that I used to be an ancient deity. The magic we used then is far beyond what you can imagine now. It is nothing much to transfer a creature's soul into another body. Why else do you think I asked for you help in creating a new body? Oh? Then what do I do now? Lin Li's interest was piqued, for even though the humorous WYRM was intimidating, it did not have a good image. If he were to pose as the reincarnation of the holy light in the brilliant shrine, it would not look good on him. It would be much grander if he could summon a real dragon, but a WYRM was too proud to sign a servant contract with a human, and thus giving a humorous WYRM a dragon's body was the next best thing he could do. It's very simple, and you don't have to do anything. Just hand the humorous WYRM and the Crimson Dragon to me, and I'll see to it. Just wait until you can summon a real Crimson Dragon to scare others, Kanoris said confidently while he thought to himself that this would be preparation for himself in the future. Alright, I'll leave it to you, then. Lin Li removed the chains on the Crimson Dragon before placing the whole carcass into the Ring of Endless Storm. He did not discard the chains, for they could shackle a WYRM, and thus had to be made of high-quality materials. Lin Li glanced around and saw that there was nothing more that he could take, thus, he stomped on the black stone platform beneath him indignantly. It was capable of turning the Crimson Dragon's power into a power source for the magical traps in the whole underground palace, so it had to be made of expensive materials too. Boom! The entire platform was placed into the Ring of Endless Storm, and the lava immediately flowed out in its place, creating a majestic whirlpool of lava. You really don't let anything of the tiniest bit of value go, do you? Kanoris could not bear to watch this anymore. This kid was worth millions. He had the eternal furnace and the palace of darkness, and there were so many treasures waiting to be collected in this underground palace, yet he had to take this stone platform too. Without the Crimson Dragon, the magical traps here would be useless. It will be a waste to leave this platform here then, and it's a shame to be wasteful. Since I can take it away, it might be of use in the future, Lin Li said nonchalantly as he flew towards the entrance of the cave. Fine. There's nobody here now, but don't do this in front of anyone in the future. It's too embarrassing. Kanoris could not help but feel embarrassed for Lin Li. What do you mean it's a shame to be wasteful? Are you that broke? Why do you have to take everything from this place? Who cares what others think as long as I get what I want? Lin Li pursed his lips in annoyance. Lin Li returned to the basement filled with junk after going along the secret tunnel. Uchvalusi and Norfeller hurriedly rushed to welcome their master when they saw him emerge from the secret tunnel. One of them had a blood oath with him, while the other had a soul contract, so the magical wave that came from the secret door nearly scared them out of their minds. What happened to the two of you? Lin Li was in shock too, as Uchvalusi and Norfeller looked somewhat disheveled. Their clothes had many tears, and the stuff that littered the basement seemed to have been swept by a typhoon. Master, we don't know what happened, either. We were attacked not long after that strong magical wave disappeared, Uchvalusi said with a confused face. Oh, I see. Lin Li immediately knew that this was yet another sinister trap laid by Osric. Since somebody had destroyed the main power source on the inside, then there'd be another one-time attack by the other traps outside to take the people waiting there by surprise. Uchvalusi was nearly legendary, while Norfeller triumphed in his speed, hence, while the trap left them a little disheveled, it did not cause them much harm. If it were a large group of men searching this underground palace, then the losses would be serious. Now that the magical trap had been destroyed, there was nothing else in this underground palace, besides Rodhart, that could stop Lin Li from taking whatever he wanted, and nobody knew if Rodhart was alive or dead. As Lin Li left the basement with his two undead servants, the underground palace looked nothing like it had before. Firstly, all of the lights had dimmed, and without light, the underground palace was plunged into darkness. It seemed like these magical lamps were also powered by the Crimson Dragon, which was the core energy source. It was easy to understand why it looked so dim, as though it was lacking energy before. Anyone would struggle at first if they were captured, and then their fight would gradually die down, and if anyone touched the trap, then there would be a way for them to stimulate the trap to start working. Even though they knew that their master had destroyed the magical trap's mechanism, Uchvalusi and Norfeller were still shocked when they saw the situation in the palace. It seemed like many of the magical traps had been activated as the locations of all the traps were revealed. It did not feel like much to them when they were in the basement, but now that they were looking at it, they could not help the chill that ran down their spines. Now, everything they were looking at was theirs. Nobody would mind getting too much money, and even though Lin Li had already gained a lot from the Throne of Darkness, he was still in a good mood to have another large sum of money going into his pockets. As he had already scanned the place using a warlock's eyes previously, Lin Li knew where everything was located, and thus he did not have to search any further. He merely led his two servants around from place to place, gathering everything they saw and placing it in the Ring of Endless Storm. He could contain the entire underground palace with the Ring of Endless Storm, much less just the treasures. However, Lin Li was not that in need of money, and thus he decided to have mercy and leave the underground palace whole. The same could not be said for the things that he could move. Not even a chair was spared, as everything went into the Ring of Endless Storm. Uchvalusi and Norfeller were servants, and thus could not comment much on what their master was doing. On the other hand, Kanoris had had enough, and was screaming in Lin Li's mind by now. Hey kid, you're too much. How is that chair of value to you? What do you know? This is an antique. Do you know how much elven-style furniture is worth on the market? Lin Li casually pocketed a bookshelf, and just like that he emptied yet another house. Are you short of that money? Kanoris asked incredulously. I didn't say I was going to sell it. Anyway, the Tower of Dusk needs this furniture, so I might as well let them use it. Which other guild of magic would be able to use only elven-style furniture like us? Lin Li replied delightedly. Lin Li did not think much of it at first, as he simply wanted to collect everything he saw. Besides, the furniture was very beautiful, so it would be a waste to leave it here anyway. However, after he gave Kanoris a few patronizing replies, he realized that his idea was in fact a pretty decent one. If he wanted to attract more mages to join the Tower of Dusk, then he not only had to provide them with impeccable magical equipment and precious potions, he also had to make sure that their learning environment was comfortable. That was especially the case for a guild of magic, which was actually a very loose organization as opposed to a closely knit one. If he wanted to increase the mages' sense of belonging, then just providing them with material benefits was not enough, building upon their mental well-being was important too. Hence why having a legendary mage as the president was so influential. It meant that joining would give them a chance to be taught by a legendary mage. Having an elegant environment was also important for the mages as it would soothe their minds and increase their productivity at work. Even though the High Elves were cruel dictators and were overthrown by humans as a result, nobody could refute the fact that they had an understanding of the word elegance like no other. Every artifact left behind by the High Elves was a masterpiece highly valued by everyone. Many people, even mages, thought that owning a piece of elven-style furniture was something to be proud of. Now, if all the furniture used in the Tower of Dusk was of the elven style, it would become a lethal temptation to many mages. Nobody would refuse an elegant environment to work and learn in, and when they truly liked a place, that was when they'd start to develop a sense of belonging. Alright, you always have a reason for things. Kanoris admitted defeat. Nobody knew that he was with this fellow anyway, and even if it was embarrassing, it had nothing to do with Kanoris. Various precious magical ingredients, powerful magical equipment, and the lost chants that were written in the High Elf's print were all collected and placed in the Ring of Endless Storm. Lin Li was like a locust swarm, devouring everything he could without leaving a single thing behind. Well, he had taken over the entire Throne of Darkness back in the Abyss of Tharlan, so he was actually showing Osric respect by leaving the underground palace be. After taking away everything, Lin Li led his two servants back to that wall again. Even after taking all that he had taken, it was the things here that were of the most value to Lin Li. Lin Li stretched out his hand and pressed a magic-resistant gem. When he took his hand away, the magic-resistant gem bounced off the wall. He gave a slight nod of his head before he told Norfeller, "See what I did just now? Take all these stones off." "Yes, master." Norfeller's figure swerved, and a blurry figure could be seen gliding around the wall, accompanied by the sound of the magic-resistant gems bouncing off. He returned to Lin Li's side and handed over the bag filled with magic-resistant gem, the wall behind him bare save for the hundreds of holes that were once outfitted with magic-resistant gems. Lin Li tapped the wall with his hands. These magic-resistant gems were no less valuable than the things he had collected earlier, but what could there be behind this wall? Without the magic-resistant gems, the powerful aura that seeped through the wall seemed even more powerful than that of the Crimson Dragon. Lin Li was not afraid, however. He even felt a sense of familiarity from that powerful strength. "You sure you want to knock down this wall?" Kanoris asked with a bit of worry. Uchfalusi and Norfeller could not hear Kanoris, but they were thinking the same thing as they looked at Lin Li questioningly. The energy waves that came from the other side made them tremble uncontrollably as they were well aware of the fact that they were incredibly insignificant in front of this powerful strength. "Don't worry, I know what to do," Lin Li said as he waved and cast a spell. The once hardy wall was now incredibly weak without the magic-resistant gems. With just a simple spell, the wall fell as easily as shattered glass. As the wall collapsed, it revealed a 1,000-years-old secret. What appeared before Lin Li and the rest was a place much more spacious than the underground cave that the Crimson Dragon was in. It was also a world that made everyone feel strange. There were frozen flames and burning snow. It was a world of fire and ice, where large blocks of ice floated in lava. The two extreme forces were in conflict with each other as they continued to oppose each other, yet they were reborn again and again. They repeatedly suppressed each other, but strangely enough, none of them gained the upper hand. Even Kanoris was stunned. Two forces that could not coexist with each other but were trapped in the same place. What exactly was this Osric thinking? Lin Li lifted his head, only to see a stream of blue and a stream of red light zip across the sky, sometimes entangled with each other as they took turns to play catch. No wonder he felt a sense of familiarity from here. Lin Li was now sure that the two streams of light that were chasing after each other were two of the 7 pieces of debris of the stars, the polar snow which represented the water element and the raging flames which represented the fire element. That was right, that was it, the polar snow and raging flames. Lin Li's feelings were indescribable as he was shocked that the polar snow and the raging flames would be here. He was also trying to contain his emotions and felt a hint of nostalgia upon seeing them. He had once been in possession of them when he was still in another world. Now that he was seeing them again, he was already a true mage. The 7 pieces of the debris of the stars contained the basic elemental rules that the world was constructed of. Polar snow and raging flames were also the 2 most powerful pieces of them. The polar snow contained the water elemental rule, and as water had no fixed shape, the polar snow could take on many different forms. It could turn into tidal floods and swallow the earth, or become invisible frost to freeze up everything in the world. The raging flames contained the fire elemental rule and was violent, using its strength to sweep through everything, leaving nothing but ashes in its wake. As the polar snow and the raging flames were 2 of his favorite pieces of the debris of the stars, many powerful magical beasts in the endless world had died a horrible death to them. He had accomplished the highest-paying mission back in the endless world thanks to the polar snow and raging flames, leaving behind a legend as he did so. While others thought that he had finished the mission with a tinge of a legendary flavor, Lin Li thought that there was much more he could have improved on. It had been a fight with a magma python that lived in the deeper parts of a volcano. As it lived in a scalding environment, it not only had powerful physical strength, but was also gifted with fire element magic of all kinds. Having spent years in magma, it was also covered by a hardy layer of crystallized armor, which not only protected it from ordinary weapons, but also made it very resistant to magic. Even striking at it with full force using a magical weapon could not break through the magma python's defenses. For some reason, the magma python had left the volcano it lived in, and Bright Moon City at the foot of the mountain was turned into a sea of fire overnight as the magma python crazily attacked everything in its sight. Not even the gamers' organizations and the city militia could stop the magma python's attacks, and so the Castellan announced an unprecedented mission reward of 1 million gold coins to the person who killed the magma python in order to protect the city. Lin Li had just emerged from the Well of the Sun then. In order to obtain the legendary weapon, the Stars of Fury, he had devoted all his assets, so when he saw the mission announced by Bright Moon City, he was tempted as the huge reward was a timely financial aid for him. He rushed overnight to reach the city engulfed in flames and faced the magma python alone. While everyone thought that he was going to meet his death, he had taken down the magma python that left everybody helpless with just a strike from the polar snow and the raging flames, making it disappear in a puff of smoke in an instant. While others thought that it was a legendary feat, Lin Li thought that it was far from one. The polar snow and the raging flames were so incredibly powerful that was hardly a fight at all as there was no danger in it whatever. The polar snow could take on countless forms, while the raging flames was capable of burning down everything. Once Lin Li had both of these pieces of the debris of the stars, his power would increase tremendously, marking an otherworldly difference. After all, just one strike of the polar snow and the raging flames wiped out the magma python that not even its bones were left. Even though Lin Li did not have the Stars of Fury now, and could not maximize the effect of the 2 pieces of the debris of the stars, he still had the light and dark pieces of the debris of the stars, and that was usually enough to make other legendary powerhouses avoid him. Actually, the most important thing to Lin Li now was not to use these pieces of the debris of the stars as a weapon. He was, after all, no longer the hunter from the game, but a true mage. The most important thing for him now was to understand and use the elemental rules, and the pieces of the debris of the stars were brimming with the purest elemental rules. Lin Li had understood the darkness and light rules from the gloomy dark and the holy light, and even though it was only a shallow understanding, he had been able to use the gloomy dark and holy light to create a magical domain of frost, light, and darkness. With that magical domain, he was able to take down a powerful opponent like the Lord of Darkness even though he had just entered the legendary realm. A magical domain's power was not determined by its purity, as too extreme of one kind of power would only result in one losing the others. Hence, the most powerful magical domain in the eyes of mages was the world they lived in. It was thus every mage's dream to create a magical domain as close to the world as possible. However, it required an incredibly large amount of effort for a mage to understand every rule, and it required luck as well. It was hard to even understand, much less master, even one of the 7 rules that governed the world of Anril, so who could master all 7 of them? Hence, creating a magical domain that was comparable to the real world was still something that only existed in theory. Lin Li did not know whether humans were capable of creating the world, and he did not bother thinking that far either. What he knew was that now that he would once again be in possession of the polar snow and the raging flames, he could use their strength to understand the water and fire elemental rules and make his magical domain even more powerful. In the magical domain of frost, light, and darkness that Lin Li had created, the frost rule was the one that he had truly mastered, and it was also the one that he had based his magical domain on. The other 2 rules, light and darkness, were only there because he had external aid, and he could only depend on the frost rule to form the magical domain. As the frost rule was a secondary rule derived from the water rule, TS power was limited as compared to the 7 basic rules. Amongst the 3 rules that the frost, light, and darkness magical domain was constructed of, the frost rule could be said to be a short board of the magical domain. However, once he had gotten hold of the polar snow, he would be able to use the power it contained to perfect the frost rule and even transform it into the primary and original form of water elemental rule. Ultimately, he would be able to turn his frost domain into a water domain. As a legendary mage, Lin Li knew very well what a magical domain created from a primary rule entailed. Hence, all the magical domains created from secondary rules would lose their purpose to him. Every mage knew that the different elements had a suppressing effect on each other, but this was not an absolute. In the fight with the Crimson Dragon, for example, it should have been the water element suppressing the fire element, yet the water element had no chance of truly retaliating. If not because he had fashioned an area of inert fire element, there would have been no opportunity for him to unleash his frost domain. However, a secondary rule and a primary rule had a relationship like that of a master and a servant, a relationship that would not change no matter how powerful either of the rules was. A secondary rule that was derived from a primary rule would always have to submit to a primary rule no matter how powerful it was, which was to say, when Lin Li was able to create a water domain, all the legendary mages with a frost domain would have to submit to him no matter how powerful they were. Besides, due to the popularity of ice element magic in this world, many mages would choose to create a frost domain after they reached the legendary realm. As for the other piece of the debris of the stars, the raging flames, Lin Li could use it to create a flame domain, and with gloomy dark and the holy light, he would be able to create a magical domain that consisted of 4 primary rules. Anril was only made out of 7 primary rules, and he had 4 now. While he could not be certain if he would be able to create a world of his own, a magical domain that consisted of 4 primary rules was already pretty close to the real world. Be it the suppressing effect that elements had on each other or the relationship between primary and secondary rules, with the 4 primary rules he possessed, Lin Li was now capable of dealing with legendary mages who were level 22 or level 23 without any problems. Such was the reality of legendary mages. They no longer competed in terms of strength, but in their understanding of the rules in this world. Hence, it was of utmost importance for Lin Li to obtain these 2 pieces of the debris of the stars. Nobody would refuse to become stronger, just like nobody would refuse riches. Moreover, based on the information he got from Tutankhamun, he would have to save the world in another couple of years. However, the sight before him was somewhat strange as the polar snow and raging flames were not sitting there quietly, waiting for him to collect them. Instead, they had turned into 2 streams of light chasing each other in the sky like children playing together. This was hard to believe as they were of opposing natures. The polar snow and the raging flames were just like the gloomy dark and the holy light, The gloomy dark and the holy light would fight each other to death if they met, and the polar snow and raging flames should not be much better. Looking at this now, however, it seemed that the polar snow and the raging flames had completely abandoned their nature. The surroundings were even more peculiar as burning flames and chilling cold seemed to coexist perfectly in this strange world, despite being of opposing natures. Lin Li could even feel that the water element and the fire element in this world were so high in terms of purity that they were well on the way to form a magical domain. Natural. A naturally occurring magical domain. Lin Li was taken aback, even Juresco appearing before him would not make him feel so surprised. A naturally occurring magical domain? Perhaps nobody in Amrel had witnessed something like that, much less him. Even people who had not learned magic would know that water and fire opposed each other, just like light and darkness. For them to coexist, there had to be a third element to serve as a mediator. Usually, it would be the earth or the wind element for water and fire, while it would usually be chaos for light and darkness. Without the mediating element, the opposing elements would definitely not be able to coexist, and the consequences of forcing them to would be unthinkable. There was a very powerful magical trap that forced two opposing magical elements together but kept them separated using some method. When the trap was activated, one could finish off a magic shooter using just a very simple spell that made use of magical elements. However, due to the danger and difficulty of forcing two opposing magical elements together, anybody had yet to be able to create a magical trap capable of killing an archmage. If the world before him where fire and water coexisted was a magical trap, then an explosion of this trap would wipe out the whole Dragon Mountains, or even the whole breezy plains. Not even Lin Li, a legendary mage, or a sanctuary master would be spared from being blown into the tiniest specks of dust. The good thing was that Lin Li could tell that even without a mediating element, both the fire and water elements were coexisting in harmony, with no trace of a conflict at all, hence, there was no need to worry. However, it was the very fact that he did not need to worry about an impending explosion that made Lin Li even more curious as to what could be capable of leading to this phenomenon before him. How did something allow two opposing elements to form a naturally occurring magical domain? This was like a miracle. Or perhaps, it was a miracle. This was something that even the dragon aspect that mastered the primary rules was not capable of. Everyone knew that a magical domain represented the peak of magic, and thus only the powerful legendary mages would be able to possess one. This was because a magical domain was created with powerful magic by a legendary mage after they understood the rules of the world. The god of mages Juresco had once said that what a mage asked for in their life was simply to understand the truth of the world. The truth was that a human's power was limited, and no matter how he trained and became physically strong, he would still be unable to escape the inborn constraints. A warrior trained his combat energy, while a mage trained his magic, but this was just like how a human trained his physical strength, he would still be unable to escape his bodily constraints. In order to do things that they were not physically capable of, humans, or perhaps intelligent life, learned to make use of tools to aid them in accomplishing their goals. Just like the goblins who managed to create the alchemy colossus without the talent for magic nor physical strength. The only way mages could escape the constraints of their body and achieve greater strength was to learn to use the power of rules. No matter how powerful their magical equipment, even if it was able to raise their abilities by over 100 times, it was still limited. Hence, only by understanding the truth of the world and knowing how to use the rules of the world could one become a true legendary mage. A legendary mage and an archmage differed not only in terms of strength, but also in terms of their understanding and use of the truth and the rules of the world. While 10 magic shooters might defeat an archmage, 10 archmages were nothing in front of a bona fide legendary mage. This was because while an archmage and a magic shooter were worlds apart in terms of strength, they both had the same superficial understanding in terms of the usage of rules, and only wielded their strength according to prescribed rules. A legendary mage was different in that they were able to use the rules of the world according to their understanding of the truth of the world. Their opponent faced not just the strength of one human, but also the strength of the rules and the strength of the world. This was not a gap that could be made up for using numbers. 10 archmages just would not make the cut, and not even 100 of them would. Take Lin Li, for example. After he unleashed his magical domain of frost, light, and darkness, he was able to create angels of light and dark that were each comparable to an archmage. 100 of these angels of light and dark were equivalent to 100 archmages. Moreover, they were not at risk of being injured or dying. Such was a legendary mage. He was not actually a human now, but someone who had already stepped into the realm of the deities and spirits, someone who was able to command the strength of the world at his will. Nobody apart from a legendary mage, no matter if it was the most powerful sword sage or the most powerful magical beast, even if it was one that had stepped into the sanctuary realm, would be able to possess a true magical domain. Perhaps they could use their combat energy or mana to replicate a magical domain, but the power it held would be much less than that of a true magical domain, and it would cost them an unimaginable amount of mana or combat energy every second. Hence, no sword sage or magical beast would be willing to do something like that unless they really had to. The requirements to create a magical domain were unusually strict, hence, it was unusual for there to be naturally occurring magical domains, much less one that was created from two opposing elements. The sight before Lin Li stunned him, as even though he was a master or a guru in many aspects, he was unable to explain the phenomenon. This was something that went against everything he knew and everything that the laws of nature stood for. It was hard to explain what was going on here with the knowledge he had. Looking at the two streams of light that continued to play tag in the sky, Lin Li could only silently associate all of this with the polar snow and the raging flames. They both represented the most primary water and fire rules, respectively, and nobody knew how long they had coexisted in this place. While he could not find any theory to back this, it did not seem all that impossible to attribute everything he saw to the creation of the polar snow and the raging flames. While they were both opposing elemental rules, fire and water had a different relationship from that between light and darkness. Light and darkness opposed each other in the sense that only one of them could exist at any one point in the same place. In the presence of darkness, there could be no light. In the presence of light, darkness would cease to exist. Hence, shadows only existed in places that light could not reach, and when light did, the shadows would disappear. However, water and fire were different. Rather than saying that they opposed each other, it would be more accurate to say that they affected each other. Water could extinguish flames, but water element could not exterminate fire element, only suppressing the explosion thereof. While fire could dry out water, it could not exterminate water element either, as it would only be able to change the form that the water element assumed. Hence, while these two elements appeared to oppose each other, it was, in fact, not impossible for them to coexist. Only, the fact that they could coexist did not mean that they would be able to create a magical domain. Hence, with Lin Li's knowledge, he was still unable to come up with an explanation for the magical domain created from both water and fire elemental rules. Anyway, no matter what the truth laid out in front of him was, the most important thing was still to secure the polar snow and the raging flames. As for the more profound reasoning and theories behind this phenomenon, that was something he could ponder another day. Lin Li closed his eyes slightly as he released a large amount of mental strength to feel this peculiar world. Even though he had a magical domain that consisted of 3 rules, he still could not help but be moved by the strength contained in this world. This is a magical domain created from primary rules. He was in silent awe. A magical domain created from 2 primary rules still held such strength that it made him fear it for some reason, even though it was not controlled by anyone. Even Kanoris, who always maintained that there was nothing he did not know, was in shock at this miracle. Having lived for thousands of years, he still could not recall anything like this in his memory. Nowhere else in Amril could there be a naturally occurring magical domain. God created a massive and flawless magical domain that was Amril, and only God could create a miracle like the one before their eyes. "Hey, what are you going to do next?" Kanoris asked Lin Li somewhat sheepishly. Was there a need to ask? Of course, Kanoris knew what was the next step. It was to obtain the magical weapons, the 2 streams of light in the sky. Even though he did not know about the debris of the stars, but with his incredible sensitivity to strength, he could clearly tell that the 2 streams of light in the sky that appeared to have a life of their own were not magical beasts, but 2 very powerful magical weapons. According to his predictions, while the two magical weapons had yet to reveal their true form, they were no less powerful than the Titan dragon spear used during the prehistoric times, a magical weapon that was hard to come by, yet there were even two of them here. He was really insanely jealous of Lin Li's luck. However, the question of how to collect magical weapons that were as powerful as these two was something that haunted Kanoris since the start. He was sheepish, because if Lin Li were to ask him how he was going to collect these magical weapons, he would not know how to answer him. He was the all-knowing soul trader, yet today alone he had come across too many things that he did not know. This would be terrible for his reputation if it continued. Kanoris did not know that Lin Li did not have to ask him how to collect the polar snow and the raging flames. He'd once been the owner of the 7 debris of the stars and the stars of fury, after all, so nobody knew the 2 pieces of the debris of the stars better than him in this world. It was nothing for him to collect them. He had managed to collect all these legendary weapons back when they had formed a complete world in the Well of the Sun, much less just a naturally occurring magical domain formed from just the polar snow and the raging flames. Oh? You can tell that these are magical weapons. Lin Li did not hurry, and merely frowned slightly as though there was nothing he could not achieve in the world. Nothing in this world can escape my eyes. Kanoris started tooting his own horn out of habit before continuing. In my opinion, these 2 magical weapons are no less powerful than the Titan dragon spear from the prehistoric times, and if you were to really collect them, then you'll really have it all. Unfortunately, if it was the Titan dragon spear, I would be able to help you, but these 2. Oh right, do you know what the Titan dragon spear is? That was the weapon the Titans used to kill the Wyrms. Whatever. I'm talking about the present, so why are you talking about the Titan dragon spear? Lin Li said, annoyed. Kanoris was silent for a while, defeated, before he said, alright, I'll just say it. Even though I can tell that these are powerful magical weapons, I don't think it'll be easy to collect them, and I don't have any idea how to do so, either. So, I would suggest you give it up since it's not very likely for you to be able to overcome the strength of these magical weapons to subdue them, and you might even be wounded by them. Kanoris could not think of any method to collect them, and did not think that Lin Li would do better, either. He was an ancient deity that had lived for thousands of years, after all, and no matter how gifted Lin Li was, he just had not seen as much as Kanoris had. Now, he was worried that Lin Li would be too stubborn. While there was no one using these magical weapons, it did not look like they were just waiting to be collected, either. Lin Li could hear Kanoris's concern, and thus he laughed as he replied, haha, don't worry, that's not what I'm worried about. There's something else. Kanoris did not calm down when he heard Lin Li. Instead, he became even more worried that something would happen to Lin Li, and he would suffer along with him. He anxiously persuaded Lin Li in his mind. I know that everything has been going smoothly for you, and even if there were dangers, you managed to avoid them, which is why you think you have everything under your control now. But I have to emphasize that you are unable to suppress the power of these 2 magical weapons. Kanoris's nagging was incredulous to Lin Li, hence, he only repeated, don't worry. Am I someone who goes in without thinking? If I say that I know what to do, then I really do, so don't worry about that. I have another problem that I need you to give me ideas for. Maybe I will be able to solve it then. The real problem to Lin Li was what he was going to do about this naturally occurring magical domain after he was done collecting the polar snow and raging flames. It was such a miracle that there might only be one such magical domain in the whole Anrel, and if he were to bid it goodbye, it might be next to impossible to see another one like this again. It was a miracle, because it was something possible only with the power of God, but it did not mean that it had to be the work of God. One thing for sure was that this could not possibly have been done by humans, because a naturally occurring magical domain had very strict requirements that could not be compared with a magical domain created by a legendary mage. A magical domain created by a legendary mage could have different rules, and as the legendary mage could serve as a mediator, these rules did not have to exactly balance out. As long as it was within the means of the legendary mage, the construction of the magical domain would not be affected even if one rule was weaker or stronger than the others. It was just like how Lin Li's magical domain created from frost, light, and darkness had 3 rules that coexisted with each other. The frost rule was the weakest, and while the light and darkness were primary rules, they were opposing ones. In other circumstances, light and darkness could not coexist, but with Lin Li's powerful mental strength and his understanding and use of rules, the three vastly different rules were able to exist in flawless harmony. It was different with natural magical domains as there was no legendary mage to serve as a mediator. It was like balancing on a thread, one imbalance could destroy the whole magical domain. There were too many factors that could affect the balance in a natural environment. There were natural phenomena that could affect the balance, and even a small fly could shatter that immaculate balance that was required to keep the magical domain intact. Hence, a natural magical domain was not something that was achievable by a human, and thus a miracle. But, even God might not be able to perfectly replicate this natural magical domain. This world where fire and water coexisted was probably the most well-balanced magical domain in the world, as both the water and fire primary rules were able to coexist so flawlessly here. Even though a large part of it was due to the polar snow and the raging flames, such flawless harmony was already so impressive that even someone from the sanctuary realm might not be able to replicate it. As all of this was naturally formed without any interference from external factors, this could not simply be attributed to luck. A coincidence might result in a surprising incident, but who knew how many coincidences were needed to create such a naturally occurring magical domain? And Lin Li had a gut feeling that if he were to leave the polar snow and the raging flames here, this magical domain would one day evolve into a complete world, one where there were only two primary rules, water and fire. By then, the magical domain would be steady on its own, and no external factor would be able to affect it. When Lin Li took the polar snow and the raging flames, then, it would not cause any damage to this magical domain, either. Unfortunately, Lin Li did not have the time to wait for that day to come based on the situation now. According to Tutankhamun, he only had a couple of years or so, and in that short amount of time, he had to do all he could to increase his power. The legendary realm was simply not enough, and the sanctuary realm was only a minimum that he had to attain. If he wanted to be able to protect all he wanted to protect when the disaster struck Anril, then he could not hesitate in the least. He would not mind much even if he was not the savior, as it was not in his nature to hide when that day really came, either. It was hard to find an egg intact in a destroyed nest, after all, and if such a disaster befell Anril, it would not be possible for him to escape unscathed alone. Moreover, Lin Li had not attained the level of not having any worldly attachments, either. He had come from another world, and did not have any kin in Anril, while due to his pursuit of magic, he did not have a lover, either. However, be it the amateur pharmacist Andoin who'd taught him magic when he'd first arrived in Anril, or Jirian, the bad-tempered fatty, or even the old fellow who took care of him after that, they held an important place in his heart even though they were always rude to him when they spoke. If he was able to let these old fellows continue spending their days pondering over pharmaceutics, then what was a bit of hard work on his part? Since he had to do something anyway, why should he tire himself over a dilemma? He would only mess up everything if he were to refuse being the savior on one hand, while tiring himself out trying to save everyone on the other. There was nothing bad about being a savior to Lin Li, as it was a proper title anyway. A title that he could use to ask those old fellows for something in return. He was already the incarnation of the darkness in Sendro's eyes, and he could always use the holy light to pretend to be the son of the holy light too. Only a fool would reject such a good deal. Hence, Lin Li had to obtain the polar snow and the raging flames as soon as he could, no matter what. These were two incredibly powerful weapons, and were also the shortcut for him to understand more powerful primary rules. There was also an even more important reason, and that was that he would now have 4 of the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars along with the gloomy dark and the holy light, but it was not just the number that mattered. The truth was that back in the Demon Fall Valley at Gerosis, when he had obtained the holy light in the underground palace, Lin Li had already had a peculiar feeling. He did not think that when he arrived in Anril, he would once again see the debris of the stars that he'd once possessed. He did not think that he was once again in possession of the holy light just because of sheer luck, but rather that there was something leading him along. The feeling intensified when he came across the second piece of the debris of the stars, the gloomy dark, in the scar of death. Looking at the polar snow and the raging flames now, Lin Li believed that he would soon come to possess all 7 pieces of the debris of the stars and the stars of fury. Until then, whether one held 3 or 4 pieces of the debris of the stars would be totally different situation. No one could guarantee whether stars of fury and the remaining 3 pieces of the debris of the stars would be quietly lying around at some corner, waiting for collection just like holy light, gloomy dark, and raging flames. Maybe they were in the hands of a powerful opponent, whereas he needed to exhaust all his knowledge and experience from the endless world to obtain them. It was imperative to collect raging flames and polar snow, but the collection of these two would certainly lead to the destruction of the entire natural magical domain. For a natural wonder with such uncanny craftsmanship, Lin Li couldn't bear to destroy it so completely. It was an utter sin for a mage like Lin Li. Do you mean to take away those 2 magical weapons and also maintain this natural magical domain? Upon hearing Lin Li's question, Kanoris secretly cursed Lin Li for throwing such a conundrum at him. A hard problem like this was even more troublesome than collecting the 2 magical weapons. Yes, think about it. I could use something like those ancient demonic runes you've given me back at the Throne of Darkness. Lin Li suppressed his anxiety and tried to give Kanoris some inspiration, be it useful or not. This is a divine place. I am not a god. Kanoris felt extremely helpless, but he had no choice but to help. He could only rummage through all his memories, hoping to find a solution. What about that demonic runes from the Throne of Darkness? Is that useful here? Asked Lin Li. No. That Throne of Darkness was the magical domain created by the Dragon of Destruction for its clone, but since it's generally out of the sphere of magical domain and can be considered a magical item, it's totally different from this natural magical domain, said Kanoris. He was getting a headache from all this. Then what should we do? This may be the only natural magical domain in the whole Anreal. Are we really going to destroy it with our hands? Said Lin Li regretfully as he stared at this bizarre water and fire world before him. Just then, an idea suddenly came to Kanoris' mind. He said, how about we shift this natural magical domain inside the eternal furnace? Shift it to the eternal furnace? Lin Li contemplated. It was indeed a way, but the difficulty of its execution was immense. Naturally occurring magical domains weren't like the Throne of Darkness left behind by the Dragon of Destruction. The Throne of Darkness was sustained by the Dragon of Destruction's power and had already been formed way back in the Dark Age. Even after the fall of the Dragon of Destruction and disappearance of the Lord of Darkness, the Throne of Darkness still remained standing. This natural magical domain was different. It was a nearly complete realm by itself. Polar snow and raging flames were the 2 core mantras and also the center of this realm. It was even right to say that they were the strong points of this entire realm. Once they were taken away, the entire realm would naturally collapse as a result. Therefore, even if this natural magical domain was shifted to the eternal furnace, it would inevitably collapse after polar snow and raging flames were collected, unless one was powerful enough to create another strongpoint. However, raging flames and polar snow were true artifacts representative of the powerful presence of the basic rules of the water and fire worlds. Not to mention his current self, even if Lin Li could one day reach the sanctuary realm, he probably wouldn't be able to create a new raging flames and polar snow. Kanoris felt that his thoughts were finally clear. He quickly said, though we can't possibly create new strongpoints for this realm, we possess the eternal furnace and the fire wyrm's magical crystal. Lin Li was stunned, and doubtfully asked, so what? Judging from his tone, Kanoris was pretty pleased with himself. He explained, though fire wyrm's magical crystal isn't as powerful as raging flames, it fundamentally displays the same fire elemental rule. If you can get one more identical ice wyrm's magical crystal, maybe we can replace polar snow and raging flames with them. Lin Li shook his head and laughed bitterly. That's an ancient fire wyrm's magical crystal. Ancient wyrms are all at least level 25 in strength. Do you think it's realistic for me to fight another ancient ice wyrm that's at least level 25 with my current abilities? Besides, even if I really killed a level 25 and above ancient ice wyrm and got its magical crystal, how do I ensure that these 2 magical crystals can reach a true equilibrium here? You should know that this is a natural magical domain. Other than raging flames and polar snow, nothing can possibly maintain this absolute equilibrium. Aware of Lin Li's doubts, Kanoris wasn't dejected in the slightest. Instead, he smiled and commented, "Heh heh, I've thought of it already. There's no need for absolute equilibrium in the first place, you just need a bit of time." That's right, at most 1 second is enough. Oh? How's that? Lin Li was stunned by Kanoris' words. Kanoris asked, "Do you remember what I told you before about shifting the darkness domain to the eternal furnace?" Lin Li nodded, and replied, "I remember that, but we didn't have time for that since we got out of the abyss of Tharlan." Then do you know what's the most distinct feature of the Throne of Darkness, or in other words, the darkness domain? Kanoris continued to show off. Is it engulfment? Lin Li wasn't annoyed by Kanoris showing off. As long as he could get what he wanted, it didn't hurt to satisfy Kanoris' emotional needs. Indeed, it's engulfment. Kanoris was very pleased that Lin Li played along. He continued, "The most distinct feature of the darkness domain is engulfment, the ability to engulf everything. No matter how powerful this natural magical domain is, as long as the eternal furnace can integrate the darkness domain, you can use that 1 second for the darkness domain to engulf it completely." But after engulfment? Hearing that, Kanoris stopped all of a sudden. Lin Li asked, "What happens after engulfment?" As a mighty ancient deity who had lived for millions of years, to say that there was anything one didn't know was a total humiliation, at least the know-it-all Kanoris thought so. Before this, he felt really embarrassed that he failed to recognize the magic gears beforehand. Later, he was even more ashamed and furious that he knew not how to collect the two powerful magical weapons. Now, it was finally time to prove himself. Upon hearing Lin Li's question, Kanoris felt so at ease. He proudly replied, "The engulfment of the darkness domain is different from that of magical domains like fire and water. The aim of its engulfment isn't destruction, but embrace." Lin Li nodded, and said, "I know about this. Go on." Speaking of engulfment, any type of magical domain was capable of some ability that could be considered engulfment, just that the characteristics of each ability were different. For example, fire used combustion as means to engulf things to enhance its own power. Meanwhile, water used infiltration as means of engulfment. Be it horrendous floods or narrow streams, all of them were insidiously engulfed via infiltration. Wind used corrosion, and earth used burying. Every element had its own unique engulfment ability. However, under current circumstances, nothing was more suitable than darkness domain's engulfment. Lin Li wanted to preserve this natural magical domain instead of destroying it to obtain its power. Thus, the all-embracing engulfment of the darkness domain was the most suitable. To explain it roughly with a metaphor, when night fell and darkness loomed everywhere, did everything disappear in darkness? No, after darkness receded, everything was still there. Although this was only a metaphor which had many loopholes, it was good enough to show the all-embracing characteristic of the darkness domain. Lin Li had quite some knowledge about the engulfing abilities of each domain, especially that of the darkness domain. This was because he held on to the debris of the star's gloomy dark, which had helped him to comprehend the laws of darkness greatly. However, to use a magical domain to engulf another magical domain was something Lin Li had never done, and he found it quite hard to imagine. Therefore, how to engulf, what would happen after engulfment, such questions had to be answered by Kanoris, who gave him this suggestion. It will be remarkable after engulfment. The natural magical domain will completely integrate with the eternal furnace. That would be as good as the darkness domain. The knowledgeable ancient deity Kanoris was unable to contain his excitement just thinking about this. Hearing Kanoris' words, Lin Li raised his eyebrows and wasn't too convinced. He said, "But the Throne of Darkness is a magical domain created by the Dragon of Destruction." What was the Dragon of Destruction? That was the dragon aspect of the Emerald World. It held the purest power of the laws of darkness, and stood at the top of the pyramid in this world. Although the Dragon of Destruction was killed by the immortal king, that didn't mean that the Dragon of Destruction was weak. It only meant that the immortal king was too powerful. There was also a significant element of luck involved in his victory. No matter how perfect and powerful the darkness domain is, it's only created by the Dragon of Destruction. Unless you have truly mastered the laws of darkness, or you're an incarnation of the Dragon of Destruction like the Lord of Darkness, it's impossible to release the true abilities of the darkness domain even after shifting it to the eternal furnace. Kanoris couldn't conceal the pride in his voice. After hearing this, Lin Li suddenly understood that Kanoris wasn't trying to say that the darkness domain created by the Dragon of Destruction was weak, but that a powerful item that couldn't release all its power was no better than a weak one. The Throne of Darkness was created by the Dragon of Destruction. Even though Lin Li had obtained the Dragon Crystal of the Dragon of Destruction and occupied the status of Lord of Darkness and the Throne of Darkness, he didn't create them by himself using the rules overall. Hence, he couldn't release the true powers of the Throne of Darkness naturally. Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.